watching the video sermon podcast of First Baptist Church of Marble Falls, Texas. For almost 130 years, FBCMF has served Marble Falls and the greater Highland Lakes area faithfully through children's programs, youth activities, and adult discipleship. We invite you to join us each and every Sunday morning at 9 and 10:30 a.m. for deep fellowship, rich worship, and a spirit-filled message. For those who find themselves unable to attend on a Sunday morning, we stream those services. Simply visit fbcmf.live during either of our service times to view it. Never miss an archived sermon by subscribing to this podcast on YouTube by visiting youtube.com/FBCMFtube. And to learn more about our church or to listen to an audio-only version of this and other sermons, please visit us online at fbcmf.org. In moments of severe stress and importance beyond measure, who will speak for those who lack the boldness to say what needs to be said? Who then speaks life and truth into the natural flow as we move from the calm state of order and orientation to the chaos that is disorientation? And then, when our lives are being rebuilt, who draws our attention to the redemptive nature found in reorientation? But we can rest easy, because it is in these moments that we can have the clarity and assurance that we so desperately need. It is in this, the perfect timing of God, that finally comes the poet.
This sermon series, Finally Comes the Poet, is based on the idea that finally comes somebody who really knows us, who just gets us. And because of that, we are totally okay for that person to speak on our behalf, or for that person to help us to say something that's been on our heart for a long time. And it's not a new kind of idea throughout our life. We often need a spokesperson, or we need a good PR firm, or we need a great lawyer, somebody who knows our mind and knows our heart and can help us to say what we really need to say. And I believe that the psalmist, the person who I call the poet, the one who wrote any one particular psalm, ministers to us in this way. He rescues us because the poet speaks to God the things that we want to say, and he speaks about God as well, the things that we want to say, and he's able to put into words our relationship to God. And so this morning, I just want to put on the table for us to look at Psalm chapter 1, an amazing psalm. But as we look at it, it's impossible to escape this, our own our own culture, and our own context, kind of the lenses through which we view almost everything. And we try to escape those so that we can read the biblical story and that we can interpret the world through lenses other than our own. But it's very difficult to do so, and at some level we just can't. And so there's a certain part of our own culture and our own context that we bring to Psalm chapter 1. And for us, it's called postmodern America. And there are many great things about our culture. There are so many wonderful things, and I love to hear stories of kindness that come from people in our culture and society. I love to hear stories of generosity and sacrifice that come from our world and from the United States. I think that they're awesome when we hear those stories, and in many, many ways, our nation is doing so well. But we're not doing well in everything. For instance, it seems to me like our culture apathetically just allows for truth to be confused. And sometimes even on purpose, so that somebody could push their own agenda, or because that they have a certain bias, we just allow for them to manipulate truth in a way in order to push their own bias. And everybody kind of has become, now a long time ago we may have been very offended by that, but nowadays it seems like, well, that's just how it goes. The end justifies the means for everybody, and so truth really doesn't matter all that much because people are thinking, as long as I can make this happen, and I believe this is good, then it doesn't matter how I got there. I can use whatever kind of falsity that I want. And so what's happened in our culture, what I see, is that the idea of truth has become irrelevant. And that's a huge deal. It's big. In many cases, our culture has no standard for right and wrong, and that's called relativism, where truth is relative. And it seems that the foundation on which morals and ethics are built has been broken. Now, I'm not suggesting that every single moral individually or every individual ethic has regressed. I don't think so. There are some morals and ethics I think that we've gotten a little bit better at. What I am suggesting, though, is that regardless of where we are with an individual moral or ethic, the foundation on which all of those morals and ethics are built is cracked and is on its way to being destroyed. It's kind of like this, that every moral or ethic is propped up by some kind of more general, more basic philosophical or ideological kind of truth. And that holds that moral or ethic in place. Picture a ladder holding up an idea. And if that ladder is taken out of the way, either that idea is going to crash or a different ladder is going to come in and hold up that idea. And I'm nervous about whatever new ladder comes in that holds all of the morals and the ethics that we find dear. But regardless, what we find today are very wide degrees and varying definitions of what people call good and evil. I was watching a documentary and there was a businessman and he was asked this question. It's not a hard question. It simply said, "Are you a moral man?" And his response was, "I'm a businessman," and that should scare the heck out of all of you. Are you a moral man? I'm a businessman, as if business is somehow separated from morals and ethics. That shouldn't be. But the reason that he said, and this is a huge company, it's a company that probably every one of us do business with at some level. We all respect it. We all give it our money. And yet the person at the top says, I'm a businessman. Well, what does all this have to do with Psalm 1? This cultural situation that we find ourselves in, with varying ideas of truth, has affected the church. It's affecting all Christians, and it's affecting me and you as well, because Christians now are struggling to be able to say in a very definite or an absolute kind of way that this is evil and this is good. And the reason we're scared to say it is because in this era, we are terrified of the backlash. We're scared that somebody's going to be mad and offended, and then they're going to write on Twitter about how judgmental and hypocritical that we are. And the media uses phrases like the backlash of this, or have y'all heard this one, the public outrage of that. These are ideas. What they simply mean is there's a lot of people who are posting things on social media about an issue. And often it's not near as big as what it's made out to be, but what happens is it makes somebody on one side feel very marginalized and feel like they're not in the side of the popular vote. And when you're not in the side of the popular vote, you begin to shrink back and not say and struggle a little bit with truth. Very reluctant to say these things. So Christians, and including y'all, it's not, I'm not talking about Christians way out there. I'm not talking about Christians up in some other part of the country. I mean, I'm talking about Christians, all of us. I'm talking about me. I'm talking about you. I'm talking about students. I'm certainly talking to the junior high and high school, middle school kids in every school, that we struggle in this confusion to know what's right and wrong. And then when we do know it, we struggle saying it. Psalms 1 is amazing because in the middle of this postmodern situation that we're in this era, finally comes the poet who just makes a definitive statement. Cut and dry. He says, blessed is the person who does not walk in the same direction as wicked people, who doesn't stand in the same place as sinners, and who definitely doesn't sit down and hang out with people who make fun of righteousness. But instead, that person delights in God's truths, even if those truths seem passé to the world. He sits and he meditates on them, and he does not consider it a waste of time to do so. And in the end, this person will be like a strong tree. But the wicked, they're going to perish. They're not going to last. And God is going to judge between the two of them. And in that judgment, only the righteous will stand. And that's exceedingly offensive. But the poet just doesn't seem to give a rip what Twitter thinks. I've read it over and over. He just doesn't seem to care. And we read it and we're like, dang, finally somebody said it. Finally somebody comes and he speaks this word. And you know what? He speaks it to everybody. Nobody gets a break from it. He speaks it to preachers and he speaks it to churches. He speaks it to companies and businesses. He speaks it to the president. He speaks it to the government. He speaks it to the women on The View. He speaks it to the military. He speaks it to all families, to everybody. He simply says, blessed is the man who doesn't do this. And when you don't, you're going to be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. Finally comes the poet who says, do you see these wicked people over here? They lie, and then they cover up their lies. They have a disregard for humanity. They don't care who they trample on in order to get their one idea across. They indulge any and every desire that they have. If they feel like doing something, they just do it. They just indulge everything. And I'm telling you, they ain't gonna make it. And if you play around with them, you ain't gonna make it either. And this matters to us. It matters for many, many reasons. Let me give you just a few reasons why a statement like this from the poet matters to us. One, let me ask, when you consider all of the Psalms together, Psalm 1 all the way through Psalm 150, and you think about all of them, do the Psalms offer something valuable and important to your life? Now, if they do, and if you want the Psalms, then you first have to walk through Psalm 1. The first reason why Psalm 1 matters is because it is the door to the rest of the Psalms. Picture the Psalms like a sanctuary. And if the doors are closed in the back and you can't get through, then you can't get into the sanctuary. There's a word for all of the Psalms together. Psalm 1 all the way through Psalm 150. As a group, they are often called the Psalter. Psalter with a P, not an S. The Psalter. And Psalm 1 is considered the door to the Psalter. But it's a very unique door. When we think about it, or when we approach this door, there's a sign on it. And unless you obey the sign, you don't get access. You lose all of the rest of them. You're going to lose Psalm 23 that Lane preached so well on last week. You lose Psalm 23 if you don't come to the door of Psalm 1. If you love Psalm 91, if you love Psalm 100, shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth, whatever value you find in any one of the Psalms, whatever help it gives you, you lose it if you don't first enter through the door of Psalm chapter 1. And there's a sign on it. And here's what the sign says. Do you identify with those who delight in the Lord? If you do, then come on in, open the door and come in. The Psalms are all yours. But those who identify with the wicked can proceed no further. Access non grata. You can't come in if you do not open the door of Psalm 1 first. That's the deal. I don't know if any of you have ever gone to one of those places and there was a man at the door and he's not going to let you in unless you looked a certain way, or you or you fit in with a certain crowd, and then you get access. Maybe you had to be on some kind of special list. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a place, like that. I like the story of this one woman who went to a famous restaurant with her pet duck and tried to get a table. And she goes up to the door, and the man at the door stops him, and he says, "Where'd you get that pig?" And the woman said, "Well, that's not a pig, that's a duck." And the guy at the door said, "I was talking to the duck." It's a tough gatekeeper, man. A mean gatekeeper. Maybe some of you have been turned away at the door for all kinds of reasons. I've been turned away at the door for a sign that said, "No shirt, no shoes, no service." One time. I was young, really, really young when that happened. Before you come into the Psalms, you have to choose. You read the sign on the door of Psalm 1, and you don't get to go to Psalm 2 and Psalm 3, and so you don't get to move forward unless you answer the sign on the door. And Psalm 1 simply says, do you care about God's way, or do you care about the way of the wicked? And if you care about the way of the wicked, you can't come in. It matters. Psalm 1 matters to us for that reason. Psalm 1 also matters to us because it narrows all of the options that we have in our society to just two things. Thank God, nothing else does that for us. Everything else is complex, and there are so many choices, and so I think this is very helpful. We need something simple. Psalm 1 says, here is a way, and it's the way of God, and here is a way, and it's the way of the wicked. He first goes into the way of the wicked. And he starts talking about don't walk here, don't stand there, and don't sit there, talking about the way of the wicked. And in verse 1, as he talks about it, it's neat, y'all. He uses this literary device called Hebrew parallelism. Hebrew parallelism. It's the idea that you say one thing and then you say it again in a way that echoes it or intensifies it, amplifies it. Hebrew parallelism says one thing, and then it says the same kind of thing, but in a more hitting, more precise kind of way. And so what he does is he talks about this first way. He says, don't walk in the way of the wicked. And it's the idea that you're walking along with people. You have found that your path has intersected people who are not godly, and they're hurtful, and they really don't care about anything that's right, and you find yourself walking with them. But as bad as that is, if you're walking with somebody, you can stop and you can start to go your direction and they can go their direction. It's easier to get away because you're just walking. So in the Hebrew parallelism, he amplifies it to the next one, and he says, certainly don't walk in the way of the wicked, but definitely do not stop and then stand there with them. Don't stand there and hang out with sinners and just stop everything that you have going. Don't stop your direction and just stand with them. And then he amplifies it even more, and he says, but whatever you do, please don't sit down with people who just make fun of the gospel, who make fun of God. Don't do that. And the idea to sit down with people in Hebrew is the idea to sit down at a meal, and it indicates relationship, and it indicates intimacy. It indicates that you agree with them and they agree with you, and you have a common bond with them. Don't sit down and build bonds with people who not only don't care about God, but they just make fun of God. That's the idea of scornful and mockers in that last idea. It starts out with wicked, and then it goes to sinners, and then it goes to the mockers or the scornful. It's bad to reject God, but y'all, the mockers and scornful take it to a whole nother level because they make fun of us. And they say things in a way that belittles anybody who cares about righteousness. And they find ways to turn it into a satirical joke. And they create characters that pick out our weaknesses as Christians, and they just hit us with it over and over again, pulling out all of our weaknesses, and they just make fun and they make fun until we feel so belittled that we don't want to stand against them anymore, that we eventually start sitting down with them because we don't want to be made fun of anymore. That's what the mockers and scornful do. They just ridicule and they ridicule until they break people down. And so in this way, it says don't walk with them, don't stand with them. And certainly, students, listen, certainly don't ever sit down and hang out and bind yourself as close friends with people who don't care about God and who make fun of the youth group, who make fun of what you believe and make fun of what you do. Don't do that. Last night, Megan and I were there, and she showed me this video and of this very popular talk show, and there were a couple people who were making fun of Christians who felt that any Christian who felt that God would speak to them, they were making fun and saying that they were mentally ill. The thing is that there didn't seem to be any kind of attitude where someone could explain to them what that really meant. So if I said, I feel like God spoke to me and called me into ministry, and they said, oh, well, you're crazy. You're hearing these voices. And I said, well, let me explain. They don't care about my explanation. They don't want me to go any further to explain. All they're saying is, you're mentally ill. We're going to make fun of you in that. And that was prime time. Psalm 1, don't walk with them, don't stand and don't sit with these people, but instead, here's the other path, the other way. Delight in God's laws. And the word law, yes, it can mean Old Testament, but y'all, mainly what the word law is talking about is simply God's instruction, God's revelation or his teaching. Delight in God's instruction. But isn't that odd? I think the idea of delighting in God's instruction is a little bit odd. The most unexciting part of putting anything together is having to read the instructions. Amen, guys? The most unexciting part, the part that you don't delight in, is when you have to read the bloody instructions. If I were to ask any of you, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word delighting? None of you are going to say instructions. It's not it. For a lot of Christians, particularly younger Christians, when they think about God's laws, the thing that comes to their mind is irrelevant. I love Jesus, but all of the laws and all the instructions and teachings in the Bible are irrelevant to my life. But it's different for older Christians. For older Christians, the feeling that they get is God's instructions are obeyed out of duty and obligation. Both of them miss the delight part. The older Christians might say, oh no, God's law is certainly relevant. It's just no fun to study it. I'm going to do it, and I'll do it out of duty, but it's far from a delight. So where do we get the delight? How do you approach God's instructions and teachings with a sense of delight? Let me give you, this is my experience, and I also think that it's biblical. Two ideas. If you want to find delight in God's laws, there are two things to be grounded in. Number one is God's salvation, and number two is God's presence. Presence. Salvation and presence. Salvation is where your life is saved and rescued and made qualitatively better. The quality of your life is better. John 10:10 talks about this kind of salvation, of being saved, where John said, I have come in order that you may have life abundant and full, qualitatively better. Your life is better because of the Lord. That is salvation. Salvation, y'all, doesn't only mean where you're going to go when you die. Salvation breaks into your life now, in the present, making your life qualitatively better in many, many ways. Now, presence, though, presence is different. Presence is the presence of God, the closeness and communion with God. And I believe that it's these two things coming together when you study the Word of God. Salvation is the what that we read in the text. That this idea is transformative. This idea is life-giving to you, and you begin to apply that idea that you read in the text, and now you begin to be saved because your life is made qualitatively better by the what that you read in that. But the presence of God is not given in the what, it's given in the how the message is coming forth as you're reading it. Almost as if you can sense the voice and the character and the hug of God Himself. It's like you hear and sense His presence right there with you. And so salvation comes forward in the what you are reading, but God's presence comes forward in His voice and how you hear it. The best way that I can explain it in my life happened to me when I was little. My grandfather sat in this chair all of my life, this one chair. And he was a big, tall man. He was about 6'2". He fought in the 1st Marine Division during World War II. And he would talk to me about Guadalcanal and Peleliu and Okinawa and all of those battles that he fought as a Marine. And, once a Marine, always a Marine. And my old grandfather would sit there and with his gray hair and his beard, and he was tall and skinny, and his skin was weathered. My grandfather was always old to me. Always. And I would sit and talk with him, and he would share with me this substance and content, a what. And what he would say were things like, make sure that when you set your mind to do something, that you do it with passion and you do it well. And that saved me. The what was important. He shared with me things like tell the truth. He shared with me things like care about people. He shared with me all of these things. And that was the what, the content, the substance of our conversations as I sat with him. But there was something else beyond all of that. There was also a tone in his voice. His voice was always kind of raspy. And as he said it, I was drawn in to his voice. And he would stop and he would give me these instructions, but he would do it through stories. And they were compelling stories about his life and how he grew up. And I was drawn into the stories because I heard his voice through all of it. So it wasn't only the what, but it was the how that he told it. And later on, I found that I delighted in his instructions. I would come home from college and I would enjoy sitting with him and hearing about his life and him telling. I delighted in it. Salvation is in the what you are seeing God teaching you in any text. But the joy, when you study that text, that particular Bible passage that you're on, the joy comes in how you hear God's voice saying it to you and what you hear of God right there in that moment. And I believe that God's salvation and God's presence comes in, and that is what gives us the delight in the law of the Lord. Those things, and I think that both of them are beautifully captured in one passage of Scripture in Psalm 25 when he brings all of it together. Look at this. I have it on the screen. Make me know your ways, O Lord. You see, he's talking about law and he's talking about instructions. What? And he says, teach me your paths. Lead me in your truths and teach me. And look, for you are the God of my salvation. You save me with the content of what you're talking about. My life is made qualitatively better. I'm better because of it. Thank you for your salvation you give me. I'm saved because of the content of it. But it's not only that. For you, I wait all day long. It's His presence, His abiding presence that's there with it at the same time. And when you read Scripture, you can begin to feel the salvation and the presence. Here's how salvation has worked with me. Here are two passages. Ephesians 4:29. Let's practice it. Tell me where the salvation is for you in this. Ephesians 4:29 says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up, that it may benefit everybody who listens. The salvation of that passage comes from me when I watch my words and I do not stupidly say things that are going to get me into trouble. I don't just let my words go, whether it's to my children or my wife or anybody. I don't just say whatever it is that comes into my mind. I watch my words and I think, Lord, what is the most helpful thing for me to say? And because of the content of that, I have found salvation. I'm saved. I don't have as many, and I have some, but I don't have as many regrettable things that I would have had to say had I not put Ephesians 4:29 into my life. Y'all get it? I'm saved by applying that. Here's another one. In James chapter 2, verse 2, it says, if somebody comes into your worship wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in shabby clothes also comes in, if you show special attention to the man in fine clothes and say, here's a good seat for you, but say to the poor man, you stand over there or sit on the floor by my feet, have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Here's how I find salvation when I read that, and this is why I delight in it. Because that verse makes me value every single person who comes in, and it forces me to pay attention to people that if the verse had not taught me that, I may not pay attention to them, and you may not either. It forces you to look at everybody and embrace them, and because when you start to embrace other people, your life is made better by them. They offer you something that you didn't think that they had to offer. And you find yourself being a much deeper and a better person. So you find salvation. That's just two examples of how you find salvation and even the presence of God in all of these things. But the last thing is this. Here's why it matters. I've shared with you the two paths, the two ways, the ways of the wicked and the ways of the righteous. And now this verse matters because the way that you choose is going to make a difference for all eternity. You're going to be judged. It says that the future of the one who went in the way of delighting in God's law, it says that you're like a tree planted by the rivers of water, and that there is prosperity that comes with that. Here's what it's exciting to me. Not only are each one of you, can you be planted as this powerful tree, and I love looking at that and seeing all of you as individuals. And you're like this powerful tree, and you're not blown by the wind and just scattered everywhere. You're strong and you're there. I love looking at your strength because of that. But here's something even more exciting. What do you think would happen when it's not just one tree, but what could happen if many people came together in a group and they all were trees? And they decided to come together like an orchard, where an orchard then can produce fruit that gives nourishment to a whole village, a whole town can benefit from an orchard. You make money off of it. An orchard is powerful, and that's just a few trees coming together. And then I thought, no, let's take it even further than that. Imagine if it's not just a few trees. Imagine 1,000 trees all coming together. And what could they offer the community in one town? 1,000 people who followed the will of God and said, his laws and his instructions are going to matter to me. What good could 1,000 people do in one community who came to do that? I've come to believe that a tree is good and an orchard is better, but a forest is best. Where the church comes together and develops this forest kind of thing. Y'all, one tree is certainly beautiful. A tree is beautiful. Here's a picture of one, man, that's so pretty. But imagine a whole forest, hundreds of them, and what they could do. Science tells us that there's a significant amount of oxygen that we breathe as a result of the tropical rainforests in our world. What we can be, y'all, is God's forest, a life-giving ecosystem for the whole world. And together we can do that. And we can do better together than you can all by yourself. Blessed is the man who delights in the law of the Lord, and he is like a tree. But blessed is the church. When all of them are planted together, y'all, Marble Falls and our Hill Country area and all the way Our world, we have enough people right here that if all of us commit to doing this, we can be an ecosystem for our community. In our world, we can do that together if we do this, but the wicked won't. You can't if you're wicked. The way of the wicked may be very popular for a little while, but it's not going to last. It certainly isn't going to last in the judgment of God. The way of the wicked is not like a tree. It's the opposite of a tree. A tree has roots and it's grounded, and you can blow the wind, but a tree is not going to fall down. It's grounded, but chaff is rootless. And so anytime there's a popular movement, or anytime somebody is scared of the backlash that might come from making this statement or doing that, chaff blows and blows. Here's a little video showing the chaff.
The seeds are removed from the stalks, and the mofu let the wind separate the chaff from the useful grain.
See the wind blowing it? So they're separating wheat from chaff, and they throw it up, and the heavy wheat falls, but even a very, very small little breeze just blows all of the chaff away. It's a powerful image that you can be like chaff. And whatever idea comes around, you're just blown with it, and you have no real identity. Not an identity in God, not an identity in anything, no real philosophy, no real ideology. You just give it to whatever is out there. Y'all, is that the way that you want to live? That just blown around like that? That's what this chaff is. And it might be popular for a moment, but it has no staying power. And so I want to suggest in conclusion how we do this, that the only way that we can make it in someone and choose the way of the Lord is to fall under the protection of the only person who ever achieved it, Jesus Christ. The only one who ever lived into this ideal Psalm 1, the only person who never walked, who never stood, and who never sat down with people that he ought not. He knew what he should do. The only one who ever lived out Psalm 1 is Jesus Christ. King David tried, but he wasn't too tree-like. He says in Psalm 51, "Have mercy on me, O God. I'm not very tree-like. I'm just a bush." The nation of Israel, they were not tree-like as well. Y'all, the only one who really became the tree is Jesus. And so what we do is we delight in Jesus Christ. We delight in what he says, and he becomes our tree. Jesus is the tree. And what we do is we find ourselves under his branches, and we find ourselves protected in him. We are like a forest, but we are like a forest underneath the great tree, Jesus Christ. Because of his death and his resurrection, because of who he is, he becomes the great tree for us. And in order for you to come into that tree this morning, will you look at the sign on the back of on the door, and it says, "Will you obey? Will you choose the way of the Lord and not choose wickedness?" And if you say yes, then the door is opened, and you can come in and join Jesus Christ. You can join him. Will you do that?
You've been watching the video sermon podcast of First Baptist Church of Marble Falls, Texas. Never miss an archived sermon by subscribing to this podcast on YouTube by visiting youtube.com/FBCMFTube. And to learn more about our church or to listen to an audio-only version of this and other sermons, please visit us online at fbcmf.org.